Don't talk unless someone asks you a direct question, she said, adjusting her lipstick in the side mirror. Then she turned, smiled tightly, and added, and try not to say you're my husband. It just complicates things. That was the warning I got before stepping out of the car. She shoved her ID badge into her clutch, handed me a folded name tag that read L. Abbott, +1, and power walked toward the hotel entrance. I stared at the tag, then at her back, already weaving between other suits and dresses like I was just a mistake she was hoping no one would notice. Inside the ballroom, no one noticed me. Correction, one person did. Her boss. Tall, sharp suit, short silver hair, and eyes that didn't blink. You brought someone? The boss asked. My wife, who suddenly had a different tone in her voice, laughed and said, he's just a neighbor. Poor guy had nothing to do tonight. I still don't know what stung more, being called a neighbor or the way everyone nodded, like that made perfect sense. Neighbor, huh? Her boss said. Eyes still locked on me. She stepped closer. I could smell her perfume. Expensive. Cold. If you're free, she murmured with a slow grin. Take me next time. And then, she winked. Not a joke wink. Not a polite one. A challenge. Laughter from the group. Raised glasses. Someone clinked a fork against a champagne flute. My wife froze. Her boss's assistant whispered something and walked off, probably texting HR or God. And I stood there, invisible. Except suddenly, I wasn't. Every word my wife had said, every excuse, every "you wouldn't fit in," it collapsed under one sentence from a woman she clearly feared more than she loved me. That's when something inside me clicked. I didn't storm out, didn't cry, didn't cause a scene. I smiled. And I stayed. Because the real party hadn't even started yet. For the next 20 minutes, I became part of the furniture. I stood there, a silent coat rack with a glass of untouched champagne, nodding along as my wife. No, Lacey, paraded around the room like I wasn't even attached to her shadow. She laughed too loudly, touched people's arms too familiarly, and only looked in my direction when she needed a distraction to avoid a boring client. The worst part? She didn't even introduce me again. After that just a neighbor moment, she'd already written me off. And yet I stayed. Her boss, however, Karina, that woman had not written me off. Every time I looked across the room, she was watching. Not subtly either. Her eyes scanned me like I was a file she hadn't yet decided to shred or promote. At one point, she tilted her glass toward me and mouthed, "You okay?" with that same grin she used earlier, like she already knew the answer and wanted to hear me say it anyway. I didn't nod. I didn't look away. I just stared back. And that's when something strange happened. Lacey saw it. And suddenly, she remembered I existed. She practically materialized at my side, looping her arm around mine with a grip that felt like a security clamp, not affection. Having fun? She asked through her teeth. All smile on the outside, full panic underneath. I shrugged. Just observing, I said. It's interesting, watching how people treat their neighbors these days. That made her grip tighten. She leaned closer and whispered, "Don't be like this. You said you wouldn't make it weird." "I didn't make anything weird," I replied. "You're the one who rebranded our marriage like a cheap product." Her eyes flashed, but she didn't get the chance to reply, because Karina was already walking toward us. "I'm stealing your neighbor for a moment," she said coolly, already reaching for my elbow. "Unless you're too attached to let him go, Julia." That name, Julia, it hit like a slap across both our faces. Karina had heard. Every time my wife used that fake name around her colleagues, every time she'd lied and reshaped her identity to appear more polished, more desirable, more single, Karina had been listening. And now she was using it like a knife. "I don't mind," I said before Lacey could stammer anything out. Karina didn't wait. She led me away from the dance floor, away from the noise, toward a quieter lounge tucked behind tall velvet curtains. No one followed. It felt like a different world. She handed me a fresh drink, sat down, and crossed her legs. "Let me guess," she said. "You're the husband who's been edited out of the narrative." I laughed bitterly. More like deleted. "Well, I liked your expression earlier. The one you gave her when she pretended you were nothing. It was dignified. Quiet rage. Most men either get drunk or dramatic. You waited." I didn't know what to say. I still don't. So she continued. "Do you want to know how many husbands I've seen humiliated at events like this? Too many. but rarely do I see one with enough backbone to just stand still and watch. And then, God help me, she leaned closer and said, I think that bothers her more than anything. I didn't plan on staying after that conversation with Karina, but something about the way she looked at me made it impossible to leave. It wasn't flirtation, not exactly. It was assessment, like she was trying to understand what kind of man would stand quietly while his wife erased him in public. When she smiled, it wasn't soft. It was sharp, deliberate, and it made me realize she wasn't someone who played fair. She told me she'd seen Lacey, Julia, as everyone here apparently knew her, climb her way through the ranks with charm and shortcuts. And she said it like a warning, not gossip. Your wife's talented, Karina said, swirling her glass. But she's gotten comfortable pretending her reality is optional. Sooner or later, it catches up. I asked what that meant, and she just smiled. You'll see. When I finally stepped out of that lounge, I expected to find Lacey waiting with one of her tight smiles, ready to lecture me about boundaries and corporate optics. Instead, she was on the terrace, her phone glowing in her hand, whispering into it. I only caught a few words. He showed up uninvited. No, I handled it. Just a neighbor, I swear. Before she noticed me watching. The look she gave me could have peeled paint off the walls. She hung up, forced another smile, and said, I think we should go. I didn't argue. The night had already told me more than she ever would. The drive home was pure silence. No music, no apologies. Just the hum of tires on asphalt and the reflection of her phone lighting her face every few seconds. I stared out the window, wondering when exactly I'd turned into a ghost sitting in the passenger seat of my own marriage. When we got home, she didn't even wait for me to open my door. She went straight to the bedroom, muttered something about an early meeting, and locked the bathroom door behind her. I stood in the dark kitchen, still wearing my blazer, staring at the half-finished bottle of champagne she'd brought home weeks ago for celebration. I almost laughed. Celebration of what exactly? The illusion? The next morning, something strange happened. I got an email from Karina. The subject line just said, professional courtesy. Inside was a short message. It was refreshing talking to someone honest for a change. If you're ever free, I'd like your opinion on something work-related. Friday, 7 p.m., same hotel. There was no signature, no title, just that. For a few seconds, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe she meant to send it to someone else. But then I remembered the look she'd given me before she walked away last night. No, it wasn't an accident. I didn't tell Lacey about the email. Why would I? That morning, she was all smiles again, suspiciously cheerful, like she'd flipped a switch. She made breakfast for the first time in months, even asked about my work, pretending like the gala hadn't happened. When I mentioned I might have a meeting Friday evening, she didn't even ask with who. That's great, she said, buttering toast. Networking suits you. And she meant it. In that detached way she said everything now. But as I watched her hum while scrolling through her phone, it hit me. I wasn't the only one playing pretend anymore. For once, she looked uneasy. Not because I'd done something wrong, but because she couldn't predict what I'd do next. And that, for the first time in years, gave me leverage. Friday couldn't come soon enough. By Friday evening, I had rehearsed a dozen ways to turn down the meeting. Every scenario ended with me coming off petty, wounded, or desperate for attention. But none of those feelings compared to the surge of adrenaline I felt when I stepped into that hotel lobby again, this time without hiding in the shadows. Karina wasn't waiting in the lounge or near the bar. Instead, a bellhop nodded to me as I walked in and handed me a room key, room 1907. I froze. Was this a mistake? But the envelope was labeled, in confident print, Mr. Abbott. The elevator ride was excruciating. My reflection in the mirrored walls looked too polished, too tense, like I didn't belong in a place like this. But when the doors opened, she was already standing there, holding the door to her suite open, not a trace of surprise on her face. You came, she said. It wasn't a question, more like a statement she'd already placed a bet on. Her suite was pristine, elegant in that minimalist, executive way, where everything feels expensive but untouched. She poured us both a drink and gestured to a folder on the coffee table. That's what I wanted your opinion on. You're good with numbers, right? I raised an eyebrow but took a seat and opened the folder. I expected spreadsheets or campaign data. What I got was Lacey's department's quarterly expense reports. Specifically, the travel and events budget. Red flags everywhere. Dozens of unexplained reimbursements, inflated catering charges, and suspicious vendor overlaps. I scanned through, stunned. This is misreporting, I said slowly. These aren't even subtle errors. Someone's laundering costs under client names. Karina nodded, like she'd been waiting for me to say it out loud. She thinks I'm not watching. She's wrong. I looked up. Why show this to me? Because I don't want this going to HR until I'm certain. And because she's already compromised too much. Her tone was calm, clinical, but her eyes burned with intent. Look, I said, placing the folder down. I don't know what's going on between you two, but I'm not part of this, whatever this is. I'm just a guy who got humiliated in front of a crowd by the woman I married. Karina didn't blink. And I'm the woman who watched your wife throw away her future for appearances. I'm offering you the truth she hides from everyone else. You can take it, or go back to pretending she's someone she's not. That was when the knock came. A single, crisp knock at the suite door. Karina calmly opened it, and standing there was a man in a pale blue shirt and expensive shoes, holding a tablet. He looked between us, confused. I thought this was private. It is, Karina replied smoothly. Mr. Abbott was just leaving. He didn't say my name. He didn't even look surprised. In fact, the moment our eyes met, something passed between us. Recognition? Guilt? I stepped forward. Do I know you? He smiled nervously. I don't think so. Karina said nothing. Neither did I. I took the elevator down alone, gripping that folder like it was radioactive. But as I stepped into the lobby, something clicked. I'd seen that man before. Not in person, but in a photo. A photo Lacey once accidentally airdropped to our TV when she thought I was out. A photo she claimed was from a networking dinner. She lied. Again. And now I had two problems. One wore a green cocktail dress and answered to two names. The other? Apparently, had keycard access to her boss's suite. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was angry. I'd already passed that phase weeks ago, but because for the first time in our entire marriage, I realized I had leverage. Real leverage. I wasn't just a victim of Lacey's emotional disappearance or her public disassociation from me. I wasn't even just the guy she mocked behind my back. I was now someone who knew what she didn't want anyone to see. And that made me dangerous, not loud, not violent, but quietly, unpredictably dangerous. The next morning, I pretended everything was normal. I made coffee, left the dishes in the sink like always, and even complimented the new blouse she was wearing. The same one I'd seen in that networking dinner photo with the mystery man from Karina's suite. Her smile froze for a microsecond when I said it. Not long enough for most people to notice, but I saw it. I saw the glitch. While she was in the shower, I took her work bag and gently unzipped the front pocket. I didn't take anything. I just looked. Receipts. A phone charger. A flash drive labeled Q3_pitch deck. I slipped it into my laptop, copied the files, and put it back before she even finished rinsing her hair. What was on it? Not pitch decks. It was a backup of her entire work laptop. Personal folders, screenshots, call logs, document revisions, the kind of careless dump people do when switching machines. 90% of it was routine, but that remaining 10? That was different. Hidden deep in a folder named Travel Docs were reimbursements from vendors that didn't match the names in the company system. Different addresses, different invoice numbers. Some of them traced back to a catering firm that, when I checked the state registry, had been dissolved over a year ago. Fraud. The kind that could end someone's career, fast. I saved everything in a zip file and emailed it to myself, buried in a chain labeled camping gear order. I used an old email she didn't even remember I had. Now I had two tracks. One, her professional unraveling. Two, the personal. And the personal was Messier. That same day, during my lunch break, I drove to the tech campus where Lacey said she'd been doing client lunch meetings every Tuesday for the last 2 months. I parked across the street from the restaurant she always named, Havenstone Bistro. It was nearly empty. I waited 40 minutes. She never showed. I asked the hostess, pretending to be a delivery guy, "Does a woman named Julia Abbott come here often?" She checked the system. Only once. Last month. With a man. Reservation was under his name, Nathan Kilmer. Nathan Kilmer. It took me 10 minutes to find him on LinkedIn. Marketing strategist. Works in a different division under Karina's umbrella. Married. Kids. House in the suburbs. But most importantly, Same smile, same shirt, the man from Karina's suite. And here's where things twist. That Friday meeting I had with Karina? That wasn't just about financial misconduct. It was a test. She was testing me. Testing whether I'd run straight to Lacey, or whether I'd stay quiet and keep my hands clean. Testing if I was a threat or a useful asset. And I had passed. Because the next day, a package arrived. No return address. Just a plain envelope with a note. He's not the first. But he's the one she texts during dinner. Inside, printouts, screenshots of texts, calendar invites. One selfie taken from our bed when she told me she was at a strategy dinner. No rage, no tears, just silence. The kind of silence that wraps around you like armor and then becomes a weapon. She had no idea I was preparing to use it. By the following Thursday, I had collected enough proof to ruin her on two fronts, professionally and personally. But strangely, I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. There was still one thing I couldn't quite wrap my head around. And it wasn't the cheating, or the lying, or even the fraud. It was the fact that she didn't think I was worth hiding it from. She hadn't covered her tracks carefully. She hadn't deleted the texts. She hadn't bothered to change her behavior at home. She'd assumed I was too dull, too naive, too harmless to ever notice. That was what stayed with me more than anything. Her absolute certainty that I didn't matter enough to be dangerous. So I decided to show her how wrong she was. That night, I made dinner. A real dinner. Candlelit. White wine chilled in the fridge. I even shaved and changed into the shirt she once said made me look almost interesting. When she walked through the door, she looked startled, like she'd stepped into someone else's house by mistake. "What's this?" she asked, setting her bag down cautiously. "I thought we could have a nice night in," I said. "Just us. No phones. No distractions." She blinked. "Is it our anniversary?" "Nope." She hesitated, then smiled, too quickly. "This is sweet." She sat across from me, reached for her wine, and sipped too fast. She was nervous. She thought I knew something. I didn't confirm it. I didn't give her the luxury of a confrontation. I gave her calm. We ate. We talked. I asked questions she wasn't used to me asking anymore. About work, her projects, her schedule. And she lied. Casually, like she was reading a script written in muscle memory. "Lunch with a new client Tuesday," she said. "Strategy meeting Friday. Maybe late. I'll let you know." I nodded. "Sounds busy. What's the client's name?" She paused, half a second too long, and said, "Archer and Brookstone." Not even a real company. I knew that. She didn't know that I knew. After dinner, I offered to do the dishes. She went to the living room, curled up with her phone, and probably texted Nathan or deleted half her inbox out of instinct. I wasn't watching. I didn't need to. The trap was already set. Because what she didn't realize was that earlier that day, I had sent an anonymous email to her company's compliance department. From a secure Proton Mail account. I included one sample invoice. One blurry photo of her and Nathan at the Havenstone Bistro. And a short message. Multiple discrepancies in event billing and vendor history. Internal documentation available. Begin with these names. I didn't mention Lacey by name, but she was the only thread connecting everything in that sample. I gave them a question. Now all I had to do was wait for them to start pulling. The following morning, she left early. No kiss goodbye, just a cold "see you tonight," and the sound of heels fading down the hallway. But she didn't go to her office. I tracked her location through our shared calendar. One she forgot was synced to my iPad. She was at a co-working suite 30 minutes away. So I did something bold. I drove there. I didn't go inside. I didn't want to cause a scene. I just waited. 2 hours later, she stepped out with Nathan. No briefcase. No laptop. No business vibe. They weren't talking. They were holding hands. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt confirmation. This wasn't emotional distance, or a workplace flirtation, or a misunderstanding. This was a new life she'd already started building, assuming I'd stay conveniently asleep in the old one. And that's when I decided I wasn't going to wait for her company to clean it up. No, I was going to burn both versions of her life to the ground, quietly, carefully, and with a smile on my face. The next few days were quiet, but not the kind of quiet that brings peace. It was the sort of silence you get right before a thunderstorm. Unnatural, expectant, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Lacey moved through the apartment with a tension I hadn't seen in years, flinching slightly every time her phone buzzed. tapping her laptop keyboard a little too quickly, laughing a little too hard at nothing. She was unraveling, not from guilt, but from fear. She knew something was coming. She just didn't know from where or whom. I kept things normal, uncomfortably normal. I cleaned the apartment. I cooked. I scheduled our overdue HVAC inspection. I even left a note on the fridge that read, "Don't forget your umbrella. It's supposed to rain." The more I acted like the perfect husband, the more she started to panic. Because deep down, she could feel it. I wasn't doing this to win her back. I was preparing to walk away clean. Then it happened. Tuesday afternoon, while she was at work, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. "Is this Mr. Abbott?" "Yes," I said cautiously. "This is Alyssa from Corporate Compliance at Venture Group. You submitted documentation last week regarding irregularities in vendor reporting. We're opening an internal review, and we'd like to schedule a confidential follow-up with you, off-site." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "May I ask how you got my name?" There was a small pause. It was forwarded internally by Ms. Karina Beckett. Of course, Karina had pulled the trigger. Not to protect Lacey, not to trap me, but to use me, and I didn't mind. Because for once, I wasn't the pawn. I scheduled the meeting for Friday. Neutral ground. Downtown office. No paper trail. When I arrived, they already had a manila folder on the table. My name on a sticker. Inside, several copies of the same spreadsheets, now marked with red annotations and yellow post-its. They weren't just reviewing what I'd sent. They were cross-referencing, mapping it. "We've already found 3 expense trails that link back to a dissolved catering company with matching invoices," Alyssa explained. "And Ms. Abbott appears on every one of the approval chains. Do you have any personal knowledge of these events being real?" I shook my head. No. And some of those dates, she wasn't even in town. I handed them the flash drive. The one I'd duplicated from her files and hidden in an old shoe box next to the tax receipts she hadn't looked through in 5 years. Alyssa accepted it silently, like it weighed nothing, but I knew better. That tiny piece of plastic was a career killer. When I left the meeting, the air felt different. Not lighter, just colder, like I'd stepped out of a long fever and into winter. That night, Lacey came home late. Hair a little too styled. Perfume a little too deliberate. Her tone? Flat. "You cooked again? I thought you'd be hungry," I said. "Rough day." "Normal," she lied, eyes not quite meeting mine. She picked at her plate, then set her fork down halfway through. "Everett," she said carefully, "has Karina ever mentioned me to you? About work?" I leaned back, slow, measured. "Why would she?" "I don't know," she said too quickly. I got called into something weird today. A routine compliance check. They're reviewing everyone in the client events group. Said it's standard, but I don't know. The timing's just odd." I didn't blink. "Maybe it's nothing." She watched me like a hunter trying to guess which way the wind was shifting. "I feel like you're being different lately," she said. I smiled gently. "I'm just tired. Marriage takes work, right?" She nodded, slowly, but her eyes didn't leave my face. "Do you still love me?" The question came out so abruptly, so unexpectedly, that for a split second I almost laughed. "Instead," I said, "I think that depends on which version of you I'm talking to. The one I married, or the one who introduces me as her neighbor." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. She got up and left the room without a word. And I sat there, alone with the empty plates, the fake candlelight, and the realization that this was the last calm before it all exploded. But the explosion? It wouldn't come from me. It would come from the front desk at her office building. The one that, in less than 24 hours, would buzz her name and tell her she was needed in conference room 6A. No warning. No agenda. Just a folder with her name on it, and everything inside. When Friday morning came, I already knew what would happen. Not the exact details. I wasn't in the room, after all, but I didn't need to be. Some things don't require a front row seat to enjoy the final act. Especially when the entire play had been building toward this scene for years. I spent the morning packing. Not everything. Just what mattered. My tools. My books. The photos that still felt real. I didn't make a show of it. I wasn't rushing. I just moved slowly, with purpose, like someone who had finally accepted that the prison door was open and he could walk out any time. Around 2:30 p.m., the first message came. From Lacey. No greeting. No emojis. No mask. They know. I don't know how. I'm suspended. Karina didn't say a word, just told me to clear my calendar. Then another one, minutes later. Was it you? I didn't reply. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I just didn't know her an explanation. Not anymore. I left the apartment just before 5 o'clock, suitcase in hand, a calmness in my chest I hadn't felt in months. Maybe years. The sun was starting to set, casting a warm orange hue across the city, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I had booked a short-term rental across town, quiet street, top floor, skylight in the bedroom. Nothing fancy, but it smelled like fresh paint and possibility. When I walked in, the place was empty, peaceful, and mine. I turned on music. Real music. Opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving since before everything went sideways. Then I pulled out my laptop and logged into an old email account I hadn't touched since college. A few unread messages blinked at the top. One of them was from Karina. Closure's a gift. Not everyone knows how to unwrap it. You did well. Quiet power is still power. Enjoy your freedom. You earned it. There was no signature. No follow-up. Just that. Later that night, as I stood by the window, watching headlights blur past below, I got another text, but not from Lacey. This one was from an unknown number. It just read, "You deserve someone who says your name in a room full of people, not someone who edits you out." I stared at it for a long time, and then I smiled. The next morning, I changed the emergency contact on all my documents, updated the lease, erased the shared calendar, deleted the last joint photo of us from my phone. It wasn't about erasing her. It was about reclaiming me. 3 weeks later, I walked into a local cafe, and the barista greeted me by name, my real name. Not neighbor, not +1, not whatever she made me up to be. And across the room, someone smiled back at me. Not out of pity, not out of guilt, but out of interest. And that was enough.